All right, welcome back to part 19 of the Sci Fi Case project. So, this tutorial series is pretty much in real time except for the super basic things. So I just want to cover, we're going to finish up this little piece here in just a sec here as we left off last time. But the blocking out phase here, you can see here I have some simple primitives down here. And this was based on the latch here. If I just add new layer here real quick. And kind of just point out it's this area right here. So basically just blocking out, simple rectangles. I mean, that's really what I did is I just put in some blocks for that in there. So I originally, if you remember a while back, a few tutorials back, I had made this from a cube, and I'll just center it back where it was. And basically anytime you have an object that you like that's pretty much there, and this is center on the center line, it's really easy to do that. Again, just hold the V key and you can snap to one of these points here, and then it's aligned. And then you don't have to worry about, is something centered exactly. But that's how you can kind of align things. And then basically what I then did is just hit Control D to make a copy of it, and then brought it down. And then, so for example, for this piece here, I just basically scaled it out. So I would hit R, and just kind of scale it out to kind of match the sort of position. And so basically just like tweaking it through basically the scale tool. And then I would push it back a little bit and have a little overlap here just to define where the latch is. Now this isn't anything that's finished in any way. This is just kind of like a blocking out thing. In fact, I'm going to delete that one there because I already have one here. But you can see it's just very rudimentary. It's just kind of like showing the place where it's at. So that's different than, more final version here, where we're going to dive into that in the next tutorial. So let's finish up with this one. Let's move this guy out of the way with this revolving hinge, and we're going to add 2 cylinders in here. One for right up here, and you can see one that I left behind here as just an idea here. And then one down here. And once you've created one, you can kind of basically duplicate it and use it again, which is kind of nice. So yeah, so actually let me go ahead and move this guy out, because we'll create one from scratch. So what I do here, instead of moving this back, you can see this guy versus this guy. Let me bring this back. Let's see, in the X direction, zero it out. And then zero it out in the Z. And you can see how much bigger this one is, especially when I hit number 4. Actually, let me just try and select both. There we go, and we'll isolate them. And now we'll hit number 4. So you can see basically one is definitely smaller than the other. And so I just scaled it down, and so I'll walk through the steps for that. So we'll go ahead and do that with this one. So we're gonna go ahead and let's temporarily move this to the side for a sec. This guy will definitely move to the side. This is a smaller one. So we're just going to repeat the same process here. So here's where we left off. Let me zero this out to bring it back to its original spot. There we go. And the pivot might not be in the correct location eventually. So the first thing I can do is right click, go to vertex, select all the verts, and I can start to scale in. This will prevent any distortion when you're scaling in with the R key. R is the hotkey for the scale tool, and you grab the center cube here, and you can just left drag, and you'll scale in proportion. So the idea here is I'm just looking at it, trying to get the correct sort of scale for this bottom piece, and I'm going to have to move some verts here. But essentially, something like that is starting to get there, where if I start to move it out, you can see here it's no longer penetrating the surface now. So at this point, I can kind of move it down back into position, which is about there, a little bit higher up, maybe about there. And then right here, I'm just going to drag across and just select these verts, not the ones up above. Actually, I can scale all of them. That's right. Let's scale all of them again, and I'm going to do it in the Z direction. So the Z won't distort the circle. It'll like pull it out this way. So this is really good. So basically what I want to do is, again, I want to block off these edges here. If you remember the idea here is to block them off. So scaling them this way will work just fine. And then now I need to drag up the circle here. So I'm going to select this whole top part here and just kind of pull it up, you know, where it needs to be, closer up to the top here. And then you can see it's kind of sticking out quite a bit. We may want that to go in a little bit more. And so what I can start to do now is select the object and isolate it. And maybe I want to thin out the verts from here across. So if I go to vertex mode, I could select all of these and I could start to scale this whole thing down just by hitting R and kind of scale it down a little bit. That just makes it a little bit thinner. I could do that. Let me do that for a sec. I might actually do that all the way down here. So I think I'm going to grab all of these guys. So I'll shift drag across these. So that will scale everything. And I'm going to actually flatten a little bit. I'm going to pull in the X direction here just to kind of pull it out. So, and oh, I need to undo that. So I forgot I have the circle up here. So I don't want to do that. I actually want to scale from the center. Scaling from the center, it'll make it smaller, but it will draw it down a little bit. So that's kind of what's going to happen here. And then I can then just pull it back up, bring everything back. And then to make it wide again, I can just hit R and kind of widen it up a little bit to match out what I have down below. There we go. So now we've kind of thinned it out a different kind of way, essentially. So now, let's see, excuse me. I think we got plenty of clearance here. And I want to see what this looks like. Yeah, you can see if I do the smooth mesh preview on it, it's definitely has a few issues. So let's add a few more edge loops in here. So the first one's these two up above. I think I want to add, and actually let me do something first. I want to just make this a little more interesting. So I'm going to select these 4 edges here and maybe scale these in a little bit just to add a little curvature there. And then I'm going to double click on my insert edge loop tool, select relative distance, and I'll add an edge loop along there and an edge loop along there. And that should hold that top form better. And then down here, there's no edge loop across here. That's why when you hit 3, you get this big widening part here. And so I just want to make sure that gets a little bit tighter there. And so I'll add an edge loop there. So we'll hit number 3. And if I click off, it looks pretty good. Let's turn off wireframe. I should just take another look at it. Yeah, I think that looks good now. I'm pretty happy the way that's looking. So now the key part is to put in a cylinder here and have the rotation kind of go across that area. So let's grab cylinder here. Again, you can go to the poly modeling shelf and click on cylinder. I have my custom shelf here. And so there it is. And I can hit R and start to scale it down. I'm leaving the defaults 20 here, but I could really lower the resolution if I wanted to. It is pretty small, so I could lower this maybe to like 12, and that would actually be okay, because what it's going to happen is when you smooth it, especially when you add supporting edge loops, it's actually going to look pretty good. So I'll go ahead and scale that down quite a bit more. You have to understand it's a very, very small piece in reference to this whole thing, so a little bit less geometry is okay. And then I'm going to snap it by holding the V key and just kind of moving the center there. And then framing it. And so it still needs to scale down a little bit more. Zoom in a little bit more. And I'm going to turn back wireframe on shade. It's just a little easier to see that way. And then I'm going to hit E for rotation, and I'm going to grab the X here, and I'm just going to hold the J key down. And this will snap in degrees. So it'll change this value, rotate X to 90. So I get like a side view here now. And then go to my scale tool and kind of scale it down. Something like that looks pretty good. And now I can hit W and kind of move it into place here. Now, if I want this geometry to go completely inside on the walls, the two walls, I really don't need the ends on this. So this is a little strange, but I could just delete these ends. But it's a little easier for me to change some extrusions and do some things with it. So I'm going to leave it alone right now, but just realize later on I'm going to end up deleting those interior faces on each side there. So let me just scale it down just a tad bit more and then hit W, and right about there, that looks pretty good. So now let's go ahead and scale it in the Z direction, and you can see 4 just to look through and see how long we need to go. And you can see I'm just like looking in there, something like that. And then if I want to make sure that this lines up centered to this, all I gotta do is hold the V key, right, and snap to the vert here, and that centers it this way. And then it's just a matter of bringing it down and kind of lining up with the circle here as close as possible. Again, it doesn't have to be exact, but you know, get it pretty close. Something like that looks pretty good. All right, now what I want to happen here is, let me look at this for a sec. Yep, that looks good. I want to scale out just a little bit more. So I'll hit R, scale out just a little bit. And then I want to make these ends a little thicker. So I'm going to right click and go into face mode, and then select all the faces across. And then if I control drag in the middle, I'll deselect the middle and just have the end pieces there. Then I'm going to hit Control E. And then I'm going to click once on the blue cube and then once on that center cube and drag to the left a little bit, or right. And that will scale out and essentially create like a little cap here. You can see it's a little thicker now. So as I drag that to the right, it gets a little bit thicker. Then I'm going to hit Control E and basically pull that back all the way through like so. And just make sure it pierces the geometry like so. And at that point, I could delete it. But before I do that, since I am going to repurpose this object, I may want to use those faces. So I'm going to make a copy of it real quick. So I'm just going to hit Control D and move it down here in that general area. And then we can go back and focus on this one. So now with this one, I can go back to face mode and check that out. Those faces are still selected. Pretty cool. Now I can just hit the delete key, backspace key, and now I'm going to use my insert edge loop tool just to add a few edges on these. So I'm going to zoom in and add an edge loop right here, and one here, and one here on this side, and basically just repeat the same thing on this side. So one here, whoops. And if you accidentally do that, where it goes the wrong direction, just hit Control Z to undo. Sometimes that happens. There we go. Yeah, that'll look good. And so now go to object mode on this and hit number 3. And you can see it's nice and smooth and it looks pretty good. Let me see. It looks like it needs to go down just a tad. And let's see. One thing I can do is isolate both these objects by shift clicking on them, and then it's easier to kind of like see around and rotate and stuff. And just double check, you know, does this look like it's you know, inside? It looks like, regardless, it looks pretty good. At this point I can set the pivot point for this object to this. And one thing that would have been smart is to keep the faces, and then I would have been able to have that. So let me show you another little trick. You can double click on this edge and add the face in there, and then what you can do is, I think it's shift right click, and let's see, where is it here? It is or no, it's Control Shift, right click. Let's see, right click. Oh, I have to select the face, and then Shift right click, and poke face. Here it is. So that essentially creates the same thing, the cap. So, which I'll delete, right? So now when I select this object, hit W, I can now hold the V key and literally snap. Oh, wait, what? I forgot to hit the D key. There we go. Now if you move the pivot, the whole thing's gonna move. Now I hold the V key and move the pivot, and then hit the D. So make sure you hit the D key or the insert key to move your pivot. All right, so now we've got it lined properly. So now you can see if I rotate this object, it'll rotate around there just fine. So now when you select this object, go to face mode, and those faces are still selected, so I can just delete them. Don't need them. And then bring everything back. So now, the only thing that has to happen is these both pieces have to go back a little bit in terms of space, right? We can't have it, the geometry poking through like that. So we just got to kind of move back like so, and we can move it back to maybe about there. And now if I select this object and hit E for rotation, look at that, the pivot moves. Everything works right on. Lastly, we're just gonna basically move this cylinder down to here. So the first thing we can do is hit W and snap to the center here, just by holding on V, and it will snap to there. So that's the center of the circle, and then move it in like so. And then what I can do is hold V and snap to this line here, and it will actually be perfectly centered. So from there, and then I just have to scale everything up. Now you can scale in object mode, but I do think it's better to scale in vertex mode. There's just less possibilities of distortion. So I'm going to go ahead and scale these up. So we're going to make this quite a bit bigger here. And right now I'm just kind of focusing on this part, not being concerned about the edges or anything. So right about maybe something like that. Looks good. And then we can now start to scale from the side, kind of bring that back in, and maybe bring it back out. Now, what we're going to do here is this part will actually engage, the cylinder here will engage with something else, which will be this piece here. So we actually won't need as much of that cylinder. You can see here it's going to be tucked away. So what I'm going to do is basically get rid of the end pieces here on this one. So I'm going to select all these faces, or actually just drag over everything, and then control drag in the middle, and then just delete. So now we just got basically, you know, very flat, simple cylinder. And in fact, since we're seeing so little of it, you know, when we bring everything back, I don't think we'll even need to add edge loops or anything. You know, I can hit number 3 on here, and it'll be nice and smooth in terms of previewing. We can turn off wireframe on shade, take a look at it, and that looks good. So this one has lower subdivision, but if I hit number 3 on it, you can see that 12 divisions actually looks pretty decent on there. So yeah, it doesn't look too shabby. All right, so I think we'll kind of end things here. This is looking pretty good, and the next tutorial will pretty much start to build up this more complex structure, which isn't quite finished. It needs a little port here for these circles to, I mean, there's 2 ways to do this. You could have it just penetrate, or you could show a little edge there of something that actually connects up. But regardless, that could be done with the cylinder. So yeah, I really don't have to do anything. I feel like this is pretty complete where it's at right now. So, but next tutorial we'll go over on how to create that. All right. So until then, see you soon. Cheers.